Well, here we are, folks. It's March of 2026, and we are talking yet again about this Anaheim Ducks young forward, and the idea of him potentially getting traded to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, here's the thing. Montreal is just one team that I have selected to talk about this guy with, because for whatever reason, Montreal is the team that keeps on popping up. You see, Mason McTavish is a 23-year-old Anaheim Ducks forward who is making $7 million a year till the end of 2031. 6'1", 218, a left-handed guy who had a really good season with the Ducks last year. 52 points, 76 games played, 20 goals as well, all at the ripe old age of 21 turning 22. For all intents and purposes, Mason McTavish fit the kind of play style and player profile that Ducks GM Pat Verbeek seems to value. Strong on the puck, an absolute dog, and a tough-as-nails player to have alongside of Leo Carlsson, Cutter Gauthier, Isaac Lundestrom, these kinds of guys. We've even seen it on the back end with the acquisitions of Jacob Trouba, Radko Gudas, etc. The Anaheim Ducks have an identity, and Pat Verbeek very much wants to enforce it. Mason McTavish was seen as a guy that could fit in really nicely with that profile, especially with the way he had developed in the OHL, seeing what he was able to do with Peterborough and inevitably in the Swiss League in his draft-eligible campaign, because of course the OHL wasn't playing in 2020-2021. But give it a few months into the offseason last year, and the biggest story about Mason McTavish came about because the contract that he is currently on was not signed at the time. This contract was agreed upon super late into the offseason. Mason McTavish and the Ducks could not agree on a deal, and because he was an RFA, there were a lot of conversations about whether or not this guy would get or could get traded to another team. The Montreal Canadiens were seen as a pretty big trade destination. They wanted young centers that fit in with their timeline. Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Juraj Slafkovsky, Demidov, guys in that age range. Mason McTavish is smack dab in the middle of that. 2021 draftee, same draft class as some other notable prospects. Just a little bit older than Slafkovsky, just a little bit younger than Kaiden Guhle, for example. But here's the thing about that. Mason McTavish, as of the past 2 games for the Anaheim Ducks, has gotten healthy scratched. He was healthy scratched on the 15th for the Anaheim Ducks. Jay Fresh went out here and said that McTavish is a slow skater, a non-factor in transition, and poor defensively. He shows flashes, but there's a lot of work to do to become a steady top 6 center, even if his production is generally fine. You can see right here, one of the replies has some foreshadowing. Felix Sicard, who does stuff for McKeen's Hockey and Puck Preps, went out there and said that Mason McTavish has not had the kind of leap players usually make in their 4th NHL season. He's gone from center to wing to now healthy scratch. He has shown he can be more than this with his physicality and finishing, but the lack of foot speed in Q's system has really stood out. Francois Brachot says McTavish needs a change of scenery. Between Greg Cronin and Joel Quenneville, they've ruined a once promising player. Furthermore, you had Elliot Friedman going out there and speaking about McTavish on 32 Thoughts the podcast regarding him being a healthy scratched. He was signed a week before the season. It just hasn't been right. There was a nasty contract dispute. Whenever this is over, you have to sit down with Pat Verbeek, and you have to ask, what are you doing for next year? If this happens 2 years in a row, it's trouble. So with that said, with Mason McTavish getting healthy scratched not just on the game on the 15th, but also in yesterday's game as the Ducks faced the Philadelphia Flyers, we now have ourselves some conversations on Mason McTavish that ask whether he could get traded again. And as I had mentioned, There's one team and one player in particular that keeps on getting brought up in Mason McTavish trade discourse on social media. Ladies and gentlemen, you have Montreal Canadiens fans all over the place talking about a Mason McTavish for Kaiden Guhle trade. Let's scroll Twitter and just take a look at this right here. You have one reply going out there and talking about Ghoulie and Jarofsky, circling back over to Mason McTavish. Another reply says Ghoulie for McTavish solves both of these teams' issues. Alex says McTavish for Ghoulie, ASAP. I would do Ghoulie and Doc for McTavish. Trade proposal, Ghoulie, Engstrom, Kapanen for McTavish. Ghoulie for McTavish has been rumored for so long, it makes so much sense in the summer. And then you have a whole bunch of other trade proposals. McTavish for Ghoulie has been a pretty notable talking point on Canadiens-based social media. And I wanted to talk about whether or not this trade could actually work, and if either of these two teams would be interested. Now, I'll just say this first and foremost. Kaiden Guhle is the exact kind of defender that I think Joel Quenneville and Pat Verbeek would see tremendous value in. This guy is a brick wall. The only issue is Kaiden Guhle's availability has been questioned throughout the course of the season. He's only played half the games, and he's only on pace for half the games as well. This guy's been missing a lot of time. But when he is in the lineup, you talk about a team that employs Radko Gudas and Jacob Trouba. This is the kind of guy that would fit in perfectly with that sort of a style. And with the hard-headedness that Pat Verbeek wants his players to play with, Kaiden Guhle would exemplify that pretty well. Also, we have seen the Montreal Canadiens. Without Kaiden Guhle in the lineup, they can still do pretty all right. They've been forced to deal with a Kaiden Guhle-less team for most of the season already. And when you think about the amount of defensemen that Montreal has on their roster, you could debate that there is room to move at least one of them. Mason McTavish is a guy that would come over and immediately replace what is supposed to be Kirby Dach's position on the team. If everything worked right with Kirby Dach, if that guy was just able to stay healthy and he didn't have any complications progressing, then he would have that second-line center spot on lock. Mason McTavish would provide a really good presence down the middle behind Nick Suzuki and in front of Oliver Kapanen. That's not to say I prioritize putting Oliver Kapanen down and slowing his progression overall, but just saying, Mason McTavish is a guy who is more established, and I think he probably has developed more at the National Hockey League level, that he's deserved a little bit more leeway, especially compared to what he's getting in Anaheim right now. His production has trailed off compared to last season, but then again, the guy missed out on all of training camp. Let's go back over to this Our Hockey thread and read some of the comments here. This top comment from a Ducks fan says, hey, McTavish missed out on camp and now it's affected his season. The same thing happened with Zegras and Drysdale. Just flush the season. Flush this season, and for the love of goodness, sign Cutter Gauthier and Leo Carlsson before camp. Rough go after such a difficult contract process. I don't think there's reason for panic, though. Another reply says, even though he's been horrible lately, I don't see the Ducks selling low on him if they were to move him. Yeah, the Ducks never sell low on forwards they have issues with. Never. That's a tongue-in-cheek comment. The rebuttal is here. That was a completely different situation. Verbeek never liked Trevor Zegras from the start. Anyone with a brain knew that trade was dumb, even if Poehling has been stolid. Still not the same realm as Zegras. And then you have another reply here that says, hey, McTavish is getting scratched again? Do your thing, Kent Hughes. Remember the crazy prices Canadiens fans were willing to pay this offseason for him? I'm so glad Kent is in charge, and not our Habs. People are way overreacting. He had missed camp due to contract disputes, had a new system he had to learn, and a compressed year. Anyone else, and people wouldn't be surprised of the struggles. Same thing happened to Swayman last year, and he bounced back. William Nylander once upon a time too. And then you also have the fact that he's got about 40 stitches put into his mouth recently, so even though it's a healthy scratch, quote-unquote, you could very well say that that's not necessarily how it's really going down. But with all that said, if you are a Montreal Canadiens fan, how do you feel about the idea of circling back to Mason McTavish? And is a trade for a guy like Kaiden Guhle on your appetite? And if you're a Ducks fan, do you see something like this going down as well? I hope you enjoyed this Recherche Rolls 99, and bye.